and welcome to Stork'd, the podcast, in which we explore the many ways to build and define family. This is your host, Julia, and as many of you know, I am a new mom. I have a 21-month-old. And my God, I cannot begin to explain what that experience is like. I've tried so many different ways through Sunday to articulate what new parenting has been like for me, and I can't get it right. But amazingly, a woman named Majka Burhardt, who is a professional ice climber and also an author, has just published a book called More. And I swear, it's like this woman has reached into my brain and taken so many of the experiences and thoughts and feelings that I had and put them on page so that I don't have to. And I know I'm not the only one to feel that way because every review of this book I've read has articulated my feelings about the book, which is, oh my gosh, I can't put this down. It's so relatable. It makes early parenting so human. And Majka really wrestles with the sense of identity, her relationship to success and ambition, and her relationship to the word more. What do we want from our lives? Her relationship to her husband, her partner, in raising children. It's delicious. It's so well written. And it's written in a really interesting style. I have for a long time, because I'm a podcaster and I like, I guess, the sound of my own voice, for a long time now, I have been recording voice notes to my son that I hope one day he'll listen to when he's older. And this book is actually a compilation of Majka's own voice notes and handwritten notes and journal entries. I love the conversation Majka and I had together. She is just a gem. Take a listen. If you love it, share it with a friend. You never know who might need to hear a little bit more about the postpartum experience, the new mom experience. And sign up for the Stork'd newsletter. I think it's kind of great. Follow Stork'd on social media. And here is Majka. I am so excited, Majka, to have you here with Stork'd, the podcast, which explores the many ways to build and define your family life. And you have just written a book that I have been turning to and encouraging all my friends to turn to. So I'm excited to dive into that and hear a little bit about how the book came to be. You've got so much to talk about. So let's just start at the beginning. I won't even preface it. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. It's great to be with you today. I'm so excited. And let's use this as who I am today. So my name is Majka Burhardt. I am a professional climber. I am also the founder and executive director of an organization called Legato that co-creates climate justice with Indigenous communities living in biodiversity hotspots around the world. And I'm a mom of 6.5-year-old twins.
I love that. And I like that you said, let's use this for today, which we're going to keep because I think what's so important is that our identities change on a day-to-day basis in some ways, or at least like phase to phase.
Yeah.
And as I understand your book, why it's been so important for me, at least, is that you're talking about a point in time where your identity has shifted and then you have to reorganize things like your relationship to yourself, your relationship to your significant other, your relationship to sort of what you had thought you should be doing with your partner. Is that a fair assessment of the book?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And I think also that there's this sense that if there's a part of ourselves that isn't at a certain percentage, that it's not authentic, which is sort of BS, right? Because the reality is that we're all there all the time, just different days and different seasons in our lives ask for us to show up more fully in some parts of it, right? Like there are days as parents when parenting is pretty much all you're doing because, like I just came home from traveling and both my kids had fevers and, it's like, okay, so here's what I'm doing today. So all of a sudden that day, that's the higher part of my Venn diagram, but that doesn't mean that those other pieces of me aren't there in that moment.
Yeah. Okay. So this resonates so much. Well, partly because I think you and I are, hyphen people, and I think everyone's a hyphen person, but it's sometimes used to describe people who have things that appear disparate in their quote unquote resume or on their LinkedIn profile or whatever. And in your case, it's ice climber, entrepreneur, mom, author, and any one of those is a title that we can wear with pride. And yet balancing and managing all of those things is complicated. Sometimes I get not criticized, but questioned for showing up as the CEO me or the podcaster me or the mom me. And some other people have a hard time understanding how to integrate those, And so when you're saying I can show up on any given day as a portion of myself, depending on what I either choose or what is needed, is interesting.
Well, I think we're also really in a new space for I would say men and women, but especially women around this, right? There was this time when to be a hyphen person was considered like you weren't as strong, right? Like if you were going to be a CEO and a podcaster, then you're probably not a very good CEO, right? And now, really, I would say in the past decade, that's shifted. And people are saying, no, actually, that gives you, being a generalist and having multiple things that you know how to create in your life is not a detraction on your personality or your resume. I think it all matters what it actually means when you're doing those things, right? It's not about having title soup. It's really about saying, hey, I have a diverse skill set, just like anybody does. And here's how that has amalgamated in me and like the work that I do in the world. And I'm really excited to be part of this era in that, because I think that it was incredibly limiting when, you had to be all in and you had to also stuff your other interests and your other passions so that, that was really, especially for women, I think how they were able to break into these different career tracks, because you couldn't do that if you were a lawyer and a artist, right? Like you had to give that up if it was the 60s and the 70s. And right now, I think there's a lot of pushback that's like, no, I want to do all this and I'm going to be a mom, or I'm going to, have this other passion in my life, and it's possible, and get out of my way and let me show you how I can actually do it, and also support me because it's going to be hard as hell.
100%. And the mom title is especially important as we look at the trajectory of women in the workplace. So many women who came before us had to give up the mom thing, right? You had to lean into the career in order to pursue and to achieve at the highest level, whether it's ice climbing or being an entrepreneur.
Yep.
And so doing, they either had to lean out of becoming a mom, choose not to do that, and or hide it, subvert it. This isn't a big relevant part of me. I'm not going to show up with spit up to a board meeting. That's unacceptable. That's unprofessional, right?
Yeah.
And now I think we're trying to push for the multi-hyphenate concept, especially with working parents and especially with dads, I think, to show up and be a great dad and a great parenting partner at home does not make you any less of a man, and it doesn't make you any less of a professional. That's a lot for each individual to carry and for us as a nation to carry as we're sort of changing these social norms. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know you touch on it a little in the book.
Yeah, I talk about it a bunch in the book, and the book is a real-time story of me trying to navigate this, right? So this is not a retrospective. Here's a chapter on Majka thinking about, what does it mean for the gender norms to be shifting in the workplace and for parenthood to be, it's like, here's the hot ball of fire as I was doing it, and trying to be inside of it myself and my friends. And I think that what I think that has to come with this change is just this very human level of support and openness about it, because it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be pat and logical all the time, right? We're basically saying, let's take back the curtain and talk about what people are doing and help them be their multiple selves. And so we have to step away from an understanding that everything's going to be logical and move ourselves into the place where, like I'm saying, like it's human and it's messy, right? And I think if we can do that, then we start getting the real shifts around how we support families, how we change the like gender division of labor that happens in most domestic situations at different, variations in each of them, but is still super entrenched and is reaffirmed by lots of different social structures. And I think for me that if we can unveil the reality of what we're all trying to grapple with ourselves, then we can have more of a united voice in our diversity of how we're trying to cope with it.
I like that. And I want to talk a lot about the how. But before we do that, because I know you have opinions on the how, but before we do that, I really want to get into you and your story and how this emerged for you. So let's go back and let's talk about what it felt like having twins, with all the hyphens that you currently had in your title at the time. What was the experience like stepping into parenthood?
Yeah. So I was really unsure about whether or not I was going to be a mom or would try to be a mom in my life. And I waited until I was 39 to have pregnancy be a possibility in my life, right? So what that means is that you've made a ton of decisions toward the opposite, and set up your career toward the opposite. I mean, I think the year I got pregnant in October. I mean, I started it by being on the summit of Fitzroy in Patagonia, and I was in and out of Africa, really building the organization that I run and doing a bunch of climbing in New Hampshire, and then being in France climbing. And it was like kind of awesome, right? Like all the pieces of the puzzle are coming together. And I also knew that if I were going to try to have children, that was the time, and that I needed, if I was going to give it a go, I better be giving it a go. So suddenly, you fast forward, and not only did I got pregnant with a surprise with twins. And it went, if you had like screenshot my personality and you asked me, when I was thinking I was going to get pregnant, if you're like, well, do you think how's this all going to work? And, you have to know that it's going to be different than you expect. I'd be like, yeah, whatever. Of course it's going to be different than I expect. Like, I understand that, right? Like, I like, quote unquote, like, I'm not insane, but you don't realize actually how that's only like 10% deep. And the 90% of you is like, oh no, it's not going to be different. Like, I'm really going to pull this off. Right. Because you just don't get it until you're inside of it. So for me, finding out I was pregnant with twins was like the thing that like cut all the way through 100% of me. And it's like, oh, this is a different ball game, right? And in some ways, I think that's a really big gift for me, because I'm a fairly stubborn person who likes to try to pull things off. And I had to start making some really different choices very early because of being pregnant with twins, just in terms of like what my pregnancy was like and how I was thinking about, being this Uber traveler. I remember at one point I talk about in the book being like, well, crap, I can't go on a plane by myself with two infants. Like you, you can't, or you have to find two. Yeah. And I was like, oh no.
So what was the vision you had or you held for yourself as you were trying to get pregnant, as you got pregnant? What was this expectation of what motherhood could be?
I think the vision was, of being, I think I read about like being a pregnant athlete warrior goddess, and then being a pregnant athlete warrior mama, right? And just kind of having this kid that you tuck in that goes everywhere with you. And it's sort of this extension of yourself that's like highly convenient and doesn't have to take naps at scheduled times, because those parents are super high maintenance. And then you become one of those parents times two, right? So
100%. Yeah.
I think that was my vision, whether or not I would have admitted it. And then, when twins came into the picture for me, it's like I kept having to refract that and being like, well, what does this mean? And how do I do it? And it was never an option to me to say, oh, well, now I'm going to step off, right? Like, I'm not going to climb, or I'm not going to run this organization that's really getting good traction, and we're going to start growing outside of Mozambique and like outside of the mountains. It was like, no, how do I do it? So it wasn't an option to cleave off a part of myself. It was more to say, how do all of these things exist in this new ecosystem with being a mom? And that became really what the book is about, and is me trying to find my way to that, kicking and screaming and crying and smiling and all of it, like, while also this love for these humans. And then these children become part of you. And I think in some ways, that's sometimes the missing dialogue piece, which I find really funny. When we talk about parenthood, we actually don't talk about kids. Like, we don't talk about like the kids and like what it takes to be with these other humans who have their own personalities or their own needs, right? Like, even when they're really little. And, I had a really good friend who their first kid was one of those kids who couldn't sleep without the vacuum cleaner on and bouncing them on an exercise ball, right? And it's like, oh, so I guess we're not going to be going to the brewery with our kid, right? Or, my son had a really, really bad cough that we couldn't figure out for like 18 months. And it was really hard. And it kept like throwing us back into all these sleep regressions. And, it muted my sort of big plans. And we take that out of the ecosystem, whereas your kids get older, and they're like really fritzy because if their socks aren't on a certain way, like, you can't get them out the door. And it actually is a piece of the puzzle of like what your family can do on a daily basis, right? Like, there are all those things that we know intimately as parents. We each could rattle off like the 5 things that are happening at any given time in our families, but we divorce that from these sort of inert kids who are just like, well, then, and then I'm a mom. It's like, no, hold on. What is being a mom like right now? Because in my house, it meant my son waking up at 5 a.m. with a nightmare and then cuddling my hair for an hour in bed this morning.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So a couple of the things that you say strike me as distinctly American, or at least Western culture. And the first is this concept of being a warrior parent, that you have to somehow be fighting and winning all the battles as a parent, and that we reward people who can wear all the hats and wear the cape and who make it look amazing and glossy and perfect on the outside, when inside you've got the fritzy kid who can't put their socks on and is, not sleeping and is temper tantruming. That's an interesting perspective of parenthood. And as you said, the second thing that's really surprising to me is it's divorced from the children. It's divorced from them having their own identity, having their own needs, having their own personalities. So it's really hard to navigate your changing self, reorganizing all the things that are priority for you and important for you without giving anything up. And in fact, the concept of giving something up is also distinctly American. How could we give something up?
Yeah.
Right?
I think about it as like when you're just saying that, what I thought of is that parenting is inherently a responsive.
Mhm.
It's like it's not this is my side. Like you're constantly growing and evolving, and you're in this constant dialogue with your child. And I think it's that responsiveness that is so funny because we talk about it as this. It's like, well, you go to work and then you're
Yeah.
then you're a mom, and it's like, or then you're a dad, and you're like, whoa, hold on, like then you are a this thing at home. It can take on so many different realities that are going to impact the rest. And when you said why would we give something up? I think it made me think a little bit about love and how I look at love. And I talk about this in the book a bit because it's different than necessarily how I was raised, with this idea that like like I say this to my kids all the time. Like if they crawl on top of my lap since they were little, I'm like, there's enough mama for two of you. Like that's how
Mhm.
mom's built, right? Like there's always enough of me for both of you. And it's this idea that we're actually boundless in our love. Like you can love your new mother-in-law and still love your mom, right? Like it doesn't change. You
Mhm.
don't have just like, you don't have 100 units of love. And once you've spent them all, someone has to return one, or you got to take one away from someone to give one to someone else, right? Like, and I think that's also about ourselves. I'm not saying that therefore it's easy. And this is not like you can do it all conversation, but it's more that like there's space. We just have to be gentle with what the notches are of achievement for those things that you're driving after. Right. I think that
Mhm.
because we have to think about that nuance, but there's tons of space for all the iterations.
It's so interesting that you use the word space because as you're talking, there's a part of me that's nodding along and smiling, going, yeah, that's right. And there's a part of me that's going, like feeling congested, feeling that pressure in my chest, like, oh my God, there's no space. And what I mean by this is, I absolutely agree that the love is boundless. It grows exponentially every day, and there just always seems to be more and more room for it. But when you think about all the logistics of your day to day life
Yeah.
and the number of hours you have in your day to day life to do all the
Not the
things,
same.
not the same. If you think about managing the Fritzy kid and getting to work on time and somehow, leaving room in your heart for creativity and somehow being fit because you want to age in a way that you can be there for your kids.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden, the space feels very restricted.
Yeah.
And it's like you can't smush all the puzzle pieces together by just like ramming them together and hoping there's room. Something has to give, maybe. So this is something I'm actually grappling
I
with.
think it doesn't. I think it's about different timelines. I think that sometimes, and this is something that I've had to work on for myself, and that makes it sound like I was so thoughtful about this. More like this is something the universe made sure was going to happen, and I better get on the bus, or it was going to get even harder. It's like you might not be able to pull it off in a day, and maybe you can pull off all those things in a week, or maybe you need to look at like what's the time horizon where you can actually do all those things and be gentle with yourself. Because if it's not in a day, or if it's not, when you suddenly have 2 hours in the afternoon and you're like, I actually can't do this. I can't go get exercise, write the 4 emails that I have to, show up for my kid to pick them up from school. It's like, okay, but what can I do? Right. I think that we have to have like this amoeba understanding of time so that we can say, yeah, maybe right now it's just within fall because I have a 3-month-old, that it means that I will be able to touch all these parts of my personality. But maybe there's another time that I can do all that in a week, or maybe there are times when I can do all that in a day. And I think there's this expectation that it's always going to look the same. And we're going to like go down a checklist and we're going to be like, check, check, check. And then we restart it. And that's the thing that I think has space, but we're not attuned to having a flexible time horizon and it's like a grading system. Like we're the ones creating a grading system where we keep failing. How do we change that?
So, okay, let's ask that question. If our grading system currently includes being the warrior mom, it includes making sure
Mhm.
that you have time for self care, making sure that you continue to achieve professionally at the highest level, that you are as present as humanly possible for your kids when they need you, that you are calm
Yeah.
in the moment of the Fritzy tantrum, and that you are an exceptional partner and somehow you food on the table, house clean, time for friends,
Yeah.
etc. That's a lot. Um,
You and I are both having heart
right. We're like,
palpitations
oh my
having
God, this
listened to all those.
conversation.
Yeah.
But it's healthy.
Yeah.
This is the stuff. Um, if that's the checklist, and if that's how we're currently grading ourselves as parents, what's the new paradigm?
What should be on our checklist? What should we be grading? What does having an A look like?
I don't think any of those things come off of it. I think what we do is we create a blurry timeline for when we need to achieve it, right? It's like over the course of the week, did I do this, right? And I think if we can change the due dates on it versus feeling like, again, we have to make that happen on a daily basis, then suddenly for my life, I feel like I get more space. That's where I found success in it, right? Because I want all those things. I want every single thing that you just listed. And I'm so determined to not have to give them up. And so in order to do that, I have to say, okay, so this week, that meant this level of achievement on that for that thing, right? Like yesterday, I went cross country skiing and I had actual time where I could go on like a big charging skate ski for an hour and a half. And 40 minutes into it, I was like, ugh, I don't feel good. Like I've been traveling a lot. I was in London, New York, and California, tons of book stuff. And I'm like, this is not my best use of time. Like, and I went back and I like dug into work, and then I was able to go be with my kiddos and be present with it's like you have to make these pivots. And I think there are some people who can have something very, very regimented, but like I find that it's more about like the level of self-compassion that gets me to the grade that I'm looking for, right? It's like, okay, I'm the one who's evaluating myself here. So what if I just like close my eyes a little bit and look at what I'm doing and say, oh, actually, that actually came together, right? Or that came together last month, or I'm really glad because I got to go on 3 skate skis over 2 weeks. And sure, it would have been awesome if I did them every day, but that's just not where my life is right now. Because like what you said, which I so appreciate you bringing up, is that I am really driven to go be present with my kids, right? And not just to say at every possible moment, not be with them. It's like that is a big marker of who I'm showing up as a parent. And it's something that I'm owning for myself in a way that I didn't understand that I needed to own in the past couple of years.
Yeah. So if I were to rewrite the scorecard, and I started my career in the days of the balanced scorecard, which was this like whole concept of metrics and evaluating, and it got really heady. And if I were to rewrite a balanced scorecard for parenting using what I'm hearing you say, I'm hearing things like, can we rate ourselves on flexibility? Can we rate ourselves on attuning to our needs in any given moment? And if we're headed down the path that's achieving something that doesn't meet our needs, such as going for the big workout when in fact you'd rather be charging through your emails. So that's flexibility, love, presence, and you take away the boundaries of time, that starts to feel maybe more doable. Maybe.
I think it does. I think inside of that, it's also then the larger social construct, right? And the partners that we're with, or the support system that we have. And do they have that flexibility? And do you have this real net of people who you can talk to about this? And also, are you pushing to say, hey, this is what my job is, but I'm going to take my time off? I mean, I think really daunting and can be inspiring if you've slept well and you're having a somewhat okay day is that like, it's possible, but it's going to take work. And I think that for me, I would not have admitted it when I was in college, but I really thought that we were further along than we thought. Right?
Yes, 100%. My feminist college days, I just thought we had figured it out.
Yeah.
And what was I thinking?
It's like, get out of the way. This is fine. And it's like, holy cow, we have not got it figured out. And it's our turn to do the work, right? Like, I mean, you can go anywhere from looking at what just happened with Roe v. Wade to, you talk about, every single person that I know who's just scratching their head and saying, wait a second, how are these like weird systems of who does what in a house still happening when I have this great partner who is a feminist themselves? And then here I am as a mom, but like, why are we replicating this? Right? Like it's just, and I think we need to stop being surprised by it and start going into action. And I think that that's a big piece of what we have in front of us. And it's kind of owning the fact that, hey, yeah, we really thought that this was landed, and guess what? It's not. But if we want to really support our kids, it's fighting a little harher right now.
And it's so hard because we just talked about all the things that are on our plate on a day-to-day basis without tackling the social change. Yes, be an advocate, change the world.
But I think you can do it in these ways. I think you can do that just by speaking up. I think you can do that just by saying like, hold on, if you are in a partner relationship, it's saying, hey, can we reevaluate? You go use Eve Rodsky's amazing system of fair play, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, hey, I want to look at this and I want to do it because I don't want our kids to grow up with these expectations, right? Because this is not setting them up for success. So I don't think you have to be, it's great, go tithing your time at City Hall or running for Congress. Absolutely go out there and do it. And they're even just by being vulnerable in conversation with other people and saying like, hey, I love doing this and it's hard and I want to keep doing a better job. And I think part of that is us all talking about what it takes. That shifts the needle.
And also, I think being receptive to other people's vulnerability.
Absolutely. Yep. Because you can't do one without the other. Yeah,
exactly. And we've got this toxic positivity movement going on where everyone's like, you're fine. So one of the points of frustration I had as a brand new mom, like in my first 6 months, is I would say to a friend, oh God, I'm really struggling today.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd say, no, you're not. You're doing fine.
Yeah.
And
buck up.
Yeah, you're doing great. Look, you're doing amazing. And it did two things. One is we talked a little bit about the disconnect between how you present yourself and how you feel when you have multiple hyphenates. So, she was seeing a presentation which didn't match how I felt. I felt like a mess. It maybe looked to her or to certain other people that I was doing great. And so that not meeting me where I was really frustrating. But the second thing was the toxic positivity. You're fine. Everything's fine. Rub some dirt on it. We're great. Mm-hmm. We need to be better listeners as friends, family members, colleagues, et cetera, and say, oh, it is hard. Tell me about the vulnerable spots.
Yeah, I think that's such a great way to put it. And they have to both be there to make the system change. And I also think that, as you said, like the toxic positivity, it's become this way of shoring people up. Like, yeah, but you're doing great. You're doing great. And I had a really interesting conversation at a book event the other night in California where someone asked me about postpartum. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking that we need like a new narrative about the middle. Like we now at least understand that postpartum is a thing, which is awesome. And then there's sort of like shiny, happy parenting. Like the middle is where 99.9% of people sit. So it's like, oh, if you're having a hard time, then suddenly you have postpartum. And it's like, maybe, but there could also be something else going on. And we need to start giving language to that. And as you were saying, we also need to start receiving that. I remember that, like now when I look back on when I had a 2-month-old, that was really hard. And I didn't know how to talk about it. Like, tell me 3 things that were batshit crazy in your life this morning, because I really want to know what they were. Don't just tell me what's great. Right. And it's like starting to give people space for this. My life right now is every day I wake up and my favorite thing to do is start reading messages of people who are reading the book. And they're like, thank you. Thank you for seeing and speaking to this experience, because there's like I feel like literally like I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel like I have hope because you went through the same thing and you came out the other side. And it's like, what is wrong if we're not having these conversations, but we're all in this experience? Like what a weird way to isolate parents, right? So let's stop isolating them and let's bring these conversations forward.
Yeah. And so much of the research indicates that and not surprising, we are social animals. And we do well in community with one another. And our culture is veering further and further into isolation, loneliness, depression. And I think that's especially true for parenting. And if we can create community around shared experiences, positive or negative, and if you say something about, oh, today was difficult because you're not a bad parent and it doesn't mean you love your kids any less. And if you say, you know what, I see that you had a bad day, but I had an awesome day. That's okay too. You know?
Yeah. And I think it's, there's this stigma that we still have when you and I were talking about like, wow, like we aren't as far along as we thought, right? I think about, how my grandma being super, super Catholic, it's like your kids have to look really good when they leave the house because when they go to church, this is what it is. And that now is about, you should just be comfortable with your parenting at all times and love your kids. And like, there are times when I'm like, what is my child doing? Like, this is terrifying to me, or I don't agree with it, or it makes me mad, or it's like, how do I handle this? And how do I express this? And where are the safe places to talk about that? But we still have this veil of silence around that. And I think that things are shifting. If you look at the way, there's some really great parenting pieces out there, like the work that Dr. Becky does, I think is fantastic. Being able to say, hi, I'm here and I'm a human and I'm raising other humans, which means that life is really complicated. And it is also wonderful. Like the love goes without saying. We need to also start talking about the other things and bring it back to the love, right? It's like, it doesn't mean that if I talk about, how hard it is to negotiate with my 6.5-year-old daughter her, what she should be wearing to gymnastics class. It's like for us to be able to, it's like to talk about that conversation doesn't mean that I don't love her and I don't want to support her independence. It's just me being like, I found a sticky place for me. And a lot of time, the sticky places for us as parents have to do with sticky places for us when we were kids. And all these things are so linked in. And if we don't show our kids that we're willing to navigate this and kind of create a cacophony of us, we're just passing it down to the next generation. And then they're going to be here 20 years from now being like, I thought we were further along. It's like, no, we're not going to get further along until we can start talking about this shit.
I agree 100%. And I also think there's a movement where we have more and more parenting resources, and they are wonderful. And there's some great tools for how to talk to your kids, how to negotiate in a way that gives them autonomy and also helps you get to a good consensus, or, how to meet your child where they are. But they all take a lot of extra work. Our parents' generation just said no.
Yeah.
Why? Because I said so. Right. And our generation doesn't get that privilege. We have to work all that extra hard. And so if you layer that onto all the stuff that we just talked about, the overwhelm of being a parent and doing it right is challenging.
Man. I think about this. I'm like, I don't know, maybe that just go to your room until you're in a good mood strategy. First of all, it would I actually tried it one night. I was like, what would happen if I just did? And it's like the backfire in my family and just the tears. They're like, Mama, you don't talk to us like this. I'm like, I know, but for a moment, it just seems so convenient.
It's
like
so saying, easy. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Right. And not only does it take time, but it also takes time to cogitate on that. Right.
Yes.
And to practice it and to learn about it. I mean, if you put a lot of, women who I know who are in their 70s in this conversation, there's some of them who are like, yeah, whatever. We all thought we were breaking the mold too. And we did it this way. And, in the end, you just do your best. That's too pat of an answer, right? I think we're also understanding what it means to raise resilient kids and what it means to really operate in this ecosystem where we know what depression is, this is not navel gazing. My daughter now writes me notes about things that I did that make her angry. Right. And she's like, Mama, right. So she'll have this moment, and she used to kind of go really internal and get really mad and start wanting to yell and become a very little tight person. And now we have a strategy where she sits down and she writes, and it's awesome because she is learning how to spell, and they're just these wonderful notes about her emotions. Again, it goes back to can we be more resilient? Can we raise more resilient kids? I'm not sure, but I guess I have the hope that what we were doing was not working and is not something that I feel like we can backslide to. And I think we have to play a bit of the long game when we bring people into the conversation and bring ourselves into the conversation before we expect it to have great data on the other side of it.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of the word uncertainty. And in the same way that we talked about having this vision for what parenting was going to be, and then the uncertainty of what it's actually going to be, and just stepping into the unknown and allowing it to emerge and having to reorganize your perception of what your life was going to be with twins. I'm hearing the same thing. We just have to parent blindly and hope. I mean, the blindness is not the intentionality around the parenting, but around what it might lead to. I just hope that it leads somewhere that we're on a micro level with our individual kids, and then socially that we're hoping to go.
Yeah.
We are talking some big concepts, and we're talking about parenting, but your book is about identity. And one of the things that you cover quite a bit is relationships, and in particular, your changing relationship with your husband. How did that relationship shift when your twins arrived?
Yeah. So I had this really great setup in my relationship where we both were really passionate about climbing and, made our careers that way and traveling around the world. And then life changes when you have kiddos. And, I did say, I thought I could have the Velcro one kid and things would keep going. But then we had the twofer. And I think it would have changed ginormously anyway with one, but we like to pretend it wouldn't have. And I think, for us, it was, wow, we never talked about how we were going to do school pickup before we decided to try to have children. Maybe people do that, right? Maybe there's something pre-marriage counseling that people go through. I think that would be rad. I doubt most people would have time or sit down or really be able to navigate that. And plus,
you never know, is the school pickup at 11:15? I didn't know that was a thing. I thought it was 5:30.
Exactly. First of all, there's no such thing as a school that goes past 11:15 when your kids are 2 years old. So someone has to be available to pick them up. So I think for us, suddenly what really shifted was the need for us to be a team. And having been a team in all these other ways of life didn't necessarily prepare us for it. Like, I think you could pretend and it would be like a really cool narrative. It was like, we climbed all around the world and like these radical things and it made us the perfect team. And then suddenly we had children and all those skill set transferred. That's BS, right? Because you have like kicking, screaming, crying, pooping humans who you love and who are also like shifting you. And it's like, oh, no. What's team in this iteration? And I think that for me, it was almost like taking it down to the studs and being like, we need to build this versus we need to pretend that something that we had before was going to inherently cross over to a system that has nothing to do with that system.
So what advice do you have for new parents or parents who are in the throes of it, whatever age their kids are, and they have to face that rebuilding, tearing down and rebuilding process? What is that like?
I think my best advice right now, because it's also, the wild thing about this book is that because I wrote it in real time, it's a series of letters and notes and audio journals I recorded to the kids. Like, it's like kind of this first person evidence. You can go back and be like, when my kids were 8 months, like, this is what I was really thinking, right? It was not this retrospective, like, oh, I kind of had this thought. It's like, no, it is this. And I think that I can look at it now and realize like how much I didn't understand about my partner's experience, right? But like I was so convinced was off for us. And I was so convinced it was off because of my understanding of it. But I also could not fully understand what what was going on for him, even though in my head, I thought I was doing a pretty good job. As it turns out, I was doing kind of a horseshit job at that, right? So what I think, and like coming to the advice piece of it, I think it is harder for your partner than you understand. They are trying harder than you are giving them credit for. And like, if you can find a way to establish like neutrality with them and be like, let's pretend we're friends. Let's pretend we're not partners. Like, let's have this conversation like you would with a friend and be like, ooh, this is really tricky. Who knew? What's working for you? What's not working for you? Use some of the tools. Again, my best tool, I think, for some of that rebalancing that gives you some concrete things to work with. I think fair play is rad. And I think is a really helpful. I wish I had done that when I was pregnant. I wish I'd done it again, gone through that process again when the kids were 8 months. I don't think the book was fully out by then. So geez, Eve, go faster. But I think there's this moment of kindness. And the reality is that you might have it. You might feel that when your partner doesn't, or they might feel it when you don't. And I think what's really tricky about that is that you have to keep returning to it when you're tired, when you're learning, when you're getting hammered by life. But I think that if you can find your way there, I think that you can, like I said, you can take it down to the studs and you can rebuild it. And I would say that if you're about to become a parent, to look at the person, if you are in partnership with someone and be like, this is going to be harder than we imagine. And like, should we start setting alarms in our calendar to say like, it's a check-in and like, are we in the studs yet? Like how do we commit to this? Because you get so turned around in it.
Totally.
And you really need someone else who's like, yep. And we knew it was going to be like this, but we're going to find our way, but not just be like, in 5 years or so, we'll come back to this. Cause I think that's where you get the death of that partnership.
Yeah, again, it's one more thing to work on in the same way that being the best parent, the best partner, the best version of yourself. And it's important.
But I think what it is maybe we need to shift the narrative from it's not something to work at because try this on. You're already working on it. You're already in it. You're already doing all these things. You're having all these thoughts. It's just like bringing them into the light. Because it's not like add this and like have this other to do. It's more like in this moment of, for me, I have a lot of frustration problems or I have like a lot of resentment problems that are left over from how I was raised and kind of how I operate in the world. And the only place they really show up is against my partner, right? Like I don't act like that around anyone else, but it's just like that deep, dark core of me that's like so ugly. And you're like, oh, I don't want this, right? And it's like, I'm feeling it. It's just this moment of like me checking in with myself and being like, there's probably something really, really important that's going on instead of scraping the strawberries out of the bowl, right? Like, or if this keeps going on, maybe we need to find a way. But it's like, it's not that we need to do more. It's that we need to like acknowledge we're already doing it and say like, where are these micro turns of the dial when we're in it that can make us healthier and be in a healthier relationship and be raising healthier kids?
It goes back to your analogy about being out on your skis and saying, I've got an hour and a half to be on my skis, but actually, as I tune into myself, this isn't where I really need to be right now. It's in the moment when you're really pissed, maybe just taking a pivot and saying, where is this coming from? What can I communicate about what's happening in real time?
Yeah. If this feels terrible, because I'm upset with my partner or because like I'm like having so many feels when my kid's having all these feels, and it's like, they're like colliding with each other. Like, how can I take a moment and pause and reboot and keep trying? Because like I said, like you're there, you're already there. It's just unveiling it.
So, in addition to all the things that we're talking about, changing your identity, making space for all the love that's going to grow with your kids, really doing the heavy lifting with your parenting and doing the heavy lifting with your partner, which is a lot of things. Underlying all this is a little subtext around privilege. So, I'm going to push on you a little
Absolutely.
bit here, which
Yeah.
is, to have the time and space to even worry about a partnership or to think about being the best parent possible or to talk about who's doing school pickup assumes that, you can afford a school that has pickup in that way. How do you think about the way the book might be read and interpreted within the lens of privilege?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I thought about a lot when I was putting it together into a book. Once I like looked at all these entries and like, how do I address this and how do I own this? And, you know, made sure to discuss that, like just to talk about like, hey, like we were able to have careers that also and to continue to pursue those careers so that we could have childcare support, so that we could like have some of those systems in place. And I think that the way I think there's two things. I think everybody is working on being a better parent, no matter where you are and what quote unquote privilege you have or what resources you're bringing to the table, right? I think that how we get to act on it and what other people we get to bring in our ecosystem changes. And I think that to me, I think that the universality of everybody trying is the core kernel of the thing that I'm really interested in. And I own the fact that like my crazy amalgamation of it, right? It's like, I mean, let's just talk about climbing, like to even be able to climb, to have had like that become my career means that I was set up from a very young age with access to be able to go and do those things, which means my parents, right? Like all these things are tied into each other. And it's something I also talk about in the book, right? Like my mom and my dad worked really, really hard and weren't able to be as present with us, which in turn gave me access to things, but also less access to them. So it's just, like, I think that
you can't untangle it all. It's all part and parcel of the same thing.
yeah.
And I do think you said something really important, which is regardless of where you are financially, regardless of your financial privilege, we're all trying to be the best parents we can be. And I think sometimes when we talk about privilege, we assume that it is a privilege to be the best parent you can. And that's not necessarily true. You can do it, whatever you have going on in terms of your life structure and or your finances. But it is true that we are gifted in life with certain things, whether it's parents who can work to support our passions or
whether it's family ecosystems of support and, whether it's, I mean, there are tons of different ways to understand that. I mean, I just saw a post on a mom's group that's bringing me in for a event for more. And, it's this young woman who's like, I have a 1-month-old and I have no social system here whatsoever. Like I just moved here. It's just me and my husband. It's really hard. I need to know what to do. Like, it's like I think like one of the cool things about being a parent is that a lot of people do it. Like you're suddenly doing this thing that's really, really common. And I think that if we can like have the generosity in ourselves, be like, there's no way to be a parent and not deal with like, some projectile vomiting in your life or whatever, like, any, you name it, millions and millions of things at this commonality. And I think that, finding those bridges to each other, I think are what are really important. And I think inside of that, the other thing is that being a parent, I would guarantee you that everybody is going to have a complex journey with it, whatever their complexities are, whatever their more is in like the language of the book, right? Like, we all have our own definition of that. And I think what we need to do is start stepping in to support people as they drive toward it. And it's their agenda. It's not our agenda.
Brilliant. I like that you brought that back to the book. And so if you are listening to this, if we've got somebody who's listening to this and they're not quite sure, is this book for me? Who is the audience for this book? Who is it written for?
Yeah, I think I wrote it actually for my kids, not now, but I wrote it for them so that if they do have children or if they're navigating that time in their life and that question, that they have access to who I was when I was making those choices and becoming a mom, because I really wanted that from my mom. And so in turn, I think that this book is really for anyone who is trying to make their life bigger and who's willing to have a conversation with themselves about what it's going to take to do that and to see someone else's journey with all the warts and all of the all the love and all the trying. And I think that, what I've had the experience in the past couple of weeks is, getting notes from people who are parents, who are like, who are twin parents, who have a ton in common, and people who are like, 20 years old and reading the book and saying, I'm so glad that you are bringing this into the world and talking about what it really means to try to go be a big human. So yeah, I think it's for all of us.
That's wonderful. Where can we find the book? Where can we find you?
So the book's everywhere. If you want to grab it online at a local independent bookstore, go for it. And you grab signed copies on my website. They go through our awesome bookstore here in North Conway, New Hampshire. You can find me at majkaburhardt.com or on Instagram at Majka Burhardt. If you're psyched and you want to, tell me what you think of the book. Like, I really love hearing about it, and spread the word, because I think how we do shift this is by talking about it. And I'd love to be in conversation with you as well.
Awesome. This was so wonderful. Thank you so much. I always learn so much when we talk. I've had a couple conversations now, and I just it's such a privilege to sit in your presence and hear you talk about all the stuff that you've been grappling with, because you have an ability to articulate the grappling that I haven't yet uncovered in myself. And I think we're all sort of fighting with, who are we? What are we? What do we want from our lives? How do we parent well? It's really a gift that you've given us.
Thank you. I am. Maybe I wrote this book because I desperately wanted to be having all these really cool conversations that I get to have. So here we are, right? Let's all start having them. So awesome. Thank you, Julia. Really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.